Perfect. All right. Well, I have a written opening to it, so even though we're already live, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, all right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's DPT Student Chat. Today is Wednesday, June 18th, 2014, and my name's Laura Webb. I'm joined by fellow DPT Student Chat hosts Jocelyn Wallace and Tyler Tracy. And tonight we are interviewing Dr. Kendra Gagnon and Carla Sabas about their recent article that's been published online in PT Journal entitled Professionalism in a Digital Age, Opportunities and Considerations for Using Social Media in Healthcare. Welcome, Kendra and Carla, and we look forward to discussing with you. As we discuss tonight's topic live on Google Hangout, we hope you'll follow along on YouTube and continue the discussion on Twitter. As we see questions or discussion topics pop up on Twitter, we'll address them here so that we can answer your questions and have the experts take a stab at them. And just be sure to use the hashtag DPTStudent. And without further ado, let's go ahead. If you two want to introduce yourself, maybe Kendra, you can go first, and we'll start from there.
Okay. Well, my name's Kendra Gagnon. I am a pediatric PT, so I've been a pediatric PT since 2001. I actually just recently finished my position as a clinical assistant professor and associate director of clinical education at the University of Kansas, and I will be joining the faculty at Rockhurst University this fall. I have been using social media personally since I think about 2006, 2007. I was thinking about this today. About the time my oldest son was born, which is kind of when I can kind of figure out when I started using it. But I didn't really start using it professionally or in education until 2011. So I've been using it in education for about a little over 3 years now. And yeah, I think in Carla and I's paper, we sort of talk about, and I don't want to go too far into this, but a little bit of what we referenced too is that, she and I both served as delegates during the time when the standards of conduct for social media were adopted by the APTA House of Delegates. And so I was actually able to be a part of sort of helping to write and brainstorm with the group and be part of that, putting that in place, which was a lot of fun too. So.
Okay.
Great. And Carla?
Hi, I'm Carla Sabas. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I've been at KU as an instructor since 2004. I've been at KU since 95 as a physical therapist. I've been practicing since 92. My practice area is primarily acute care. I did a lot of trauma care and neuro rehab inpatient practice, and that's kind of the areas that I teach. And I also have been teaching the research class in our DPT program and post-professional program for about the last, I think, 4 years. So when I, just to kind of follow Kendra's lead, when I think about my use of technology and in particular social media, I think I was kind of led to social media more than kind of just jumping in, which Kendra, I think, is much more adventurous about it than I am. And in many ways, Kendra has led me to kind of be more adventurous with some social media applications. I think my most daring first jump into social media, though, which is technically 2.0 technology, I've been using Second Life for the last, I think, well, it's 2008 when I first used Second Life. So I do that, and which is one of my interest areas is simulation. So I have been doing some simulations within that virtual world, Second Life. And I think I've kind of learned some things about just leading students to technology and kind of what the threshold is for kind of getting students really engaged within social technology use from that experience. I have used Facebook for teaching for about 3 years. I mostly do that for my distance students in the post-professional programs where I did it most successfully. But we use Facebook a lot for just support of our DPT program, including for our admissions process of prospective students and incoming students. So I think that kind of is kind of something that Kendra and I both have kind of reflected on, like what's our favorite platform or the platform we use the most in teaching. And I think that I kind of still kind of gravitate back to Facebook. Seems very intuitive to me, and that's probably the primary, like the most frequent use I do with technology in education. But I try to play with some other technologies, some instant polling and things like that in the classroom as well. I'll leave it at that.
Kendra, would you say you also use Facebook the most, or I kind of ask this question because I need to give full disclosure. I'm actually a PT student, and these two were my professors at KU. And Carla still is. So I'll kind of be asking these questions rhetorically for the rest of us, but
that you know Kendra, the questions you know the answer to.
Yeah. Would you agree that that's what you use the most, or
I think it depends. I guess I would probably agree that that's what I use the most. In my personal life, and we'll probably get into some kind of discussions about personal versus professional and educational use of social media. But in my personal life, I use Facebook a lot. I use Twitter a lot. I use Instagram a lot. I'm on Pinterest. I have a blog that I don't blog as much as I'd like to, but I do blog, and I've also kind of dabbled with Tumblr a little bit as well. I blog using a WordPress platform, and then also have dabbled with Tumblr as well. So I would say, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'm on all three of those daily, at least for personal purposes. I actually started in education. Using Twitter was the first platform that I used for educational purposes. And what I really found, and Carla kind of alluded to this, is that I think students, what I was hearing from students, and I kind of continued to hear from students, is that they kind of mirrored what Carla said, is that I think Facebook is the most popular site. We know that just in the U.S. Facebook is the most popular social networking site, and students feel a little bit more comfortable there. So I think I probably do use that the most, but I probably enjoy Twitter a lot. They're just different, they do different things. So I'm on a few different sites, but I would say I probably use Facebook the most. But again, I would say too that I do tend to use Facebook a little bit more for personal purposes, and I tend to use Twitter for more professional, sharing articles or things, or networking with colleagues. So I think that my uses of those are really different.
And I think Kendra would probably say that I'm one of those people that still is using Facebook like Twitter, like Twitter should, right, Kendra? Like how did you say that about somebody? You're like, Kendra probably sees some of my posts on Facebook and thinks she's so trying to use Facebook as Twitter.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing. I do think that the platforms are really different, and I don't want to just jump right in, and maybe you have some questions, about this later, but, I think that, oftentimes, whether it's just in casual conversation or when I've given presentations about my use of social media in education, people will immediately ask, what's your favorite platform, or which one do you use the most, or which one should I use? And the answer really is, it depends, because Twitter is a really different sort of platform with a completely different feel and culture than Facebook, which is very different than Instagram and Pinterest and Snapchat and all the different social networking sites out there. And really, frankly, the audiences are different. The demographics of users on those platforms are different as well. So I think that, so that's kind of maybe where, sometimes I think when people try to use Twitter like Facebook or Facebook like Twitter, I think that sometimes those things aren't as successful. They're not as successful as at getting those messages out and sharing that content, because they are really different.
Kendra, okay, there you are.
Sorry, Kendra, I got a follow-up question to that.
Okay.
You kind of mentioned in the article there, you talk about dual citizenship, and I know you kind of reference you use Facebook for more of your personal things, where as you like to do posting articles and things on Twitter. Do you recommend having a personal and a professional account for things like Twitter, specifically Twitter, or do you kind of intermingle both?
Well, so just to kind of give you a little background, the dual citizenship term is not a term that Carla and I came up with. That's a term that's been used in other sort of literature and discussions about social media and professionalism, and specifically in healthcare. Many of the institutional and organizational policies on social media will recommend that. They'll say you should have a separate personal and professional account. They'll kind of recommend that as a strategy. When I first started, well, first of all, I think it's worth noting that for some platforms, such as Facebook, that actually violates the terms of use. You can have a kind of a brand page, but you really can't have, you're not supposed to have two different profiles for the same person. So, and then on Twitter, you know, when I started with Twitter, I actually started with two accounts. I started with one that was more personal and one that was more professional. And my personal account actually still hangs out there. I just don't use it. But I started with those two, and then what I really started to sort of come to the realization of is that, you know, you can't really compartmentalize your life. You know, you're a professional all the time. And that's really kind of what we try to teach students, is that when you're at your, you know, just because you've stepped out of the clinic or out of the classroom doesn't mean that you're not a professional anymore. When you're at your kid's Little League game and you start having a conversation with another parent about pitch counts, they're viewing you in the context of your training and profession. And so I think that, you know, it's a decision that people need to make, and I think it's depends on circumstances. I think it works well for some people and not for others, but I would caution people against that maybe false sense of security that you might get, that all of a sudden, just because you have a personal account, you can post anything you want. And I would say that's absolutely not the case, that you're still going to get in as much trouble posting something on a personal account that you shouldn't as you would on a, you know, professional account. So I just think, you know, again, I worry that kind of creates a false sense of security. And I don't know if Carla has anything to add to that, because this is a conversation she and I have had a lot.
And I am not as good as Kendra about compartmentalizing within that platform. So Kendra's really good. And I kind of tried to do it, and it just got to be too cumbersome of using a grouping within Facebook. So I'm not talking about closed groups, but just kind of stratifying like who I'm messaging to when I do a post. And I know Kendra does a lot more of that than I do, and also does that with Twitter. And honestly, I probably am going to have to start doing that, because for one thing, Facebook uses an algorithm of filtering things to the top. And so I've just like noticed with the tornadoes going on in northeast Nebraska, I didn't see any of my brother or my sister-in-law's posts because I don't interact with them enough that they're even filtering to the top of my feed. So I probably need to do some stratifying my messaging, because all the pages that I follow are filtering to the top, and a lot of the things that I'm seeing from my friends on Facebook I'm not even seeing because they're getting filtered out. And I know Kendra's a lot better about that than I am. But, you know, I think it was before the House of Delegates, so about 3 years ago, I was really thinking about this, and I first started using Facebook really for just personal reasons. But it's just that rule, even when I very first started using it, is I wouldn't want to put anything on my personal Facebook account that I wouldn't want my boss to see, that I wouldn't want printed in the paper, that I wouldn't feel comfortable with my husband seeing. And whenever I post something, I'm like, would I be okay with my boss seeing this? Would I be okay with my students seeing this? And I post a fair amount of political things, but I'm kind of an open book about that anyway. People pretty much know where I'm at with that. So my Facebook is completely open. So if someone wants to creep on me, they can look at all of the things that I have on my Facebook. And so I just think about whenever I post something, I just consider like my audience is potentially anyone. So that's just kind of my philosophy on it. And I think to me, it's a better kind of personal approach for me, just to really kind of have that self-monitoring in place every time I post something. Even I sometimes post stuff that's maybe to some audiences maybe kind of edgy, but I don't think that it's unprofessional. Would you? I mean, well, you know, I can just kind of thinking.
Oh, I apologize. I was kind of agreeing with what you're saying. We've been told as students that, you know, maybe we should be setting our privacy settings, you know, more strictly. Because, you know, watch out for potential employers or something like that. But I think that's a really interesting point to, you know, maybe we should just make everything that you're posting online public, because you should really be comfortable with that. I mean, is that something that you both would agree with? Or, I mean, how do we deal with kind of this influx of privacy settings that are now available? Like, what would you recommend for students and clinicians to do with privacy?
Well, the one privacy thing that I do is I want to own my own identity. I don't want to put my identity in the hands of other people. So I will not let people tag me in pictures or tag me in posts unless they're my friends. That's kind of one privacy thing that I think is reasonable, which is kind of within that same line that Kendra and I have had this discussion about. I want to write my own online story. So when people Google me, the stuff that comes up on Google, I want it to be stuff that I've contributed to, that I own. And so just from a social media standpoint, I want to make sure that the things that pictures I'm in or tagged in or whatever, that I have some power over that. So I think Kendra probably does the same thing.
Yeah, and that's what I really think. The idea of having two separate accounts, I think that works for some people, and I think again, especially for something a site like Twitter, it might work well. But again, I would just caution that that doesn't mean that you can just put whatever you want on a personal site. What I see a lot of, and particularly students do, is that maybe they already have a pretty active Twitter account that they use really socially, to talk with friends about going out on Saturday night or something, and they want to keep that account private for those social interactions, and so then they create a public account that has where they kind of interact with colleagues and things like that. And I don't necessarily, I have some friends that are on Twitter, but I don't really do that on Twitter. I don't make plans with people and things like that. That's just not how I use it. So I think again, I think that it's hard to make kind of these sweeping statements because I think we're all different. I think we have different ways that we use these platforms. I think we all have different social circles that use them in different ways. And I mean, frankly, we have different personalities. Carla mentioned being kind of an open book, and I would say I am too. I'm kind of a, here's what I think, here's who I am. Not everybody is like that. I mean, some people are more private, in real life as well as online, and I think that's fine. So, I would kind of jump onto what Carla said about kind of privacy settings and lists, is that's what I really recommend. And again, I'm not going to tell anybody there's this certain prescription of here's the settings that you need to have. Mm-hmm. But I just think through it, and so as Carla mentioned, I actually use Facebook settings, I think, in lists. I would say my use is fairly complex, probably more complex than the average user. I have lists of close friends. I have an acquaintance list. I have a restricted list. I have a work list. I have a list with that also includes if I'm Facebook friends with any students. And I really control the information that I share. And so some people, I'll give a talk and start talking about Facebook, and I'll start talking about privacy settings, and somebody will say, "Hey, I just pulled up your Facebook and I can see your whole page. What do you mean you have privacy settings?" And I say, "Actually, you can't. You can see the things I put up there publicly, and I post a lot of things publicly." But there's a lot of things I don't put publicly. So my Facebook looks really different depending on what lists you fall in as a friend of mine. And I would just, again, encourage people to really think about that. I think Carla brings up a good point about whether you want people to be able to tag you or not. There's ways you can set it so you have to approve tags. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not a bad idea because that, again, doesn't, that gives you control of what's up there. So I just think that again, it's just, I don't know that there's necessarily certain settings that I would absolutely recommend, but I think that a lot of times, and again, especially students who are new to the profession and new to any profession, maybe have never thought about that before because they haven't had to think about a potential employer looking at their Facebook or a potential patient looking at their patient or looking for them on Facebook. And we know now that employers and patients, they're doing that. So I mean, your Facebook page, your blog, your website, your Twitter feed, that's your face to the world, and I think it's just important to think about what it looks like.
One of the things that I kind of realized though is Kendra and I mean, this is just totally showing our Midwestern roots. We both grew up in very small towns. So I think, again, kind of that openness comes from, we're very accustomed to everybody knowing your business. I mean, that's just a natural product of growing up in a town of 2,000 people.
Well, jumping off of that, I mean, you had mentioned kind of in your intro, Carla, that you use it to an extent in the admissions process at the university, and I'm curious. Yeah, I've already gotten into PT school, but I'm sure there's probably going to be some students watching that are trying to get into PT school. What
so we do not,
admissions people look at?
No, we don't. We do not go out and look at people's Facebook for the admissions. So we're not trying to search for information on potential applicants. But we use Facebook kind of like some places would use it for marketing. So our department has a Facebook page, and we PTCast has a Facebook page. So when there's deadlines, when PTCast opens up, we'll put on our department page that PTCast is open, and hey, we participate in early decision, and here's a deadline for that. So that's the way that we use it for admission. So we do not snoop on potential applicants for our program. But once students are admitted into our program, we have a closed group that we invite them to become part of, so that students can network, get to know each other before they show up on campus, and so they don't have to figure out other ways of doing that. So they use that to arrange housing, to kind of ask questions about scheduling, and kind of ask some of those questions from faculty. And I think it's been really helpful to just give students kind of a really early kind of toe into the community on our campus before they actually are on campus in person. So that's the way that we use it. But we are not using it for really young people. I don't know that the programs are, but we are not.
I think I just heard a collective sigh of relief across
But I think that,
area.
I do think that I understand that for sure. But I do think that, again, that's something that whether you're a student or you're job hunting or you're just, kind of trying to put yourself out there and thinking about, consumers and potential patients, that, we could probably have a whole other DPT chat on the ethics of whether or not it's really ethical for HR or admissions committee people to be looking up somebody's Facebook. If you don't look up everybody's, is it fair to just look up one person's? But the reality is that there are people that are doing it. I mean, as Carla said, we don't do that. That's not part of, anything we do. But, the reality is that it's out there. It's fair game. And if you Google yourself, and that's something that we actually recommend in our paper, and also just when we give talks and talk to students, is Google yourself. Put your name in Google and see what comes up to the top. Because what you will find Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, those things are going to come up to the top. So that's kind of another piece too, is there's kind of the other end of the spectrum where some providers will kind of say that maybe are a bit more resistant. They'll say, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. But the fact is that the reality is you can't really opt out of it having an online presence. If you don't have content you've created that people can find to Google you, I guarantee you there's something on, ratemytherapist.com or something. I don't know that that's a real site, but, something like that, or a Yelp review, or, just things that other people, and some other kind of news story you were in, but things that other people have created. So I think that it's, that I would encourage students, providers, everybody kind of watching and thinking about this to Google yourself and see what comes up, and then kind of try to figure out how you might, if you'd want that to look different, what do you need, what content do you need to create to make that look different?
One of the things, I was on a committee, it was kind of a high stakes student decision, and I was on a committee of other faculty, and one of the other faculty actually had kind of creeped and found a posting on a Facebook page, and the student had wrote something to the effect of, if the committee has a unfavorable decision on my behalf, I'm going to burn their houses down. And yeah, and so there was this conversation among the faculty, like, do we need to call campus security? Do we need to take this as a plausible threat? And I think we all were like, I don't think this is a really a really credible threat. But then again, just since I was really in social media somewhat already with my teaching at that point, and Kendra and I had some of these conversations, I'm like, if anything, I think this is a teachable moment for that student. That if you write that about your boss, I mean, they're seriously going to think you're going to go postal on them. Like, you can't, social media, we know this with emails and things like that. You can't be sarcastic. You can't be flip. It's like lost in translation. So when you write something on a public forum like Facebook, like, I'm so mad at my classmates. I'm so mad at that instructor. I just want to kill her. Like, face value of that. So that's kind of one of the. And there's conversations among student services professionals about students that seem to be high risk of whether, and you see this in higher education literature of, monitoring that. And again, it's for student safety where they've kind of done that. So it's interesting, and people in student services talk about that a lot more than we do as faculty about kind of surveillance of some of their high risk students.
Sure.
Kendra, have you seen some of that literature about that? Because sometimes people will kind of do screams for help on social media too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of researchers in kind of student affairs researchers that are looking at that, and that are looking at social media as a way to identify students who are that are needing help. And there's actually some research that's finding that when especially in kind of large seminar courses, freshmen on campus, undergraduate research, when freshmen come on campus and they can get kind of really lost in these huge 400-person lecture halls, that when some of these big classes incorporate social media tools, that the student outcomes are better, that they actually, it provides them a way to kind of feel connected, and actually provides a platform to cry for help, to say to somebody, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and there's actually been some research on that, and there was a paper by Ray Hunko and his group where they actually talked about that happening in a group where they had the opportunity to, a student started kind of making comments in this Twitter project they were doing that made them concerned about the student, and they were actually able to intervene. So there's some really positive, I think, ways social media is being used in education.
I think that could definitely, I think there's a whole slew of, a privacy debate maybe that could be talked about with that, although like you mentioned that, if they're making that public, I guess that is for anyone truly to view. But I kind of wanted to ask about, on the clinical side, what are your thoughts on clinicians being friends with their patients on Facebook? I know I'm friends with both of you as professors on Facebook and Twitter and Google+. But kind of what is your advice? And I know you came up with several guidelines kind of with social media use, and how we could apply that to the clinic and using that with conversations with our patients if clinicians had that.
Well, I think in our paper we didn't really give guidelines as much as we just kind of gave some discussion about how much that's a really cloudy issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's a complex and it is kind of a cloudy issue. There's a lot of gray areas. And I think that, again, a lot of organizations and institutions, actually, that's something that they put in place, do not friend patients. So I would say, first and foremost, and if you look at the paper Carla and I wrote, we actually have a figure that sort of says, here are all the different, kind of layers you need to consider about social media, from, the platform terms of service to organizational policies to professional standards to just individual best practices. And so, first and foremost, I would just say, if you're working for somebody, if your employer policy is don't friend patients, then don't friend patients. That's just first and foremost. And again, that's something, though, that we need to realize is that, make sure to ask that, to look for that, to know what that social media policy is. So kind of that aside, I do think it's a cloudy issue because, as Carla mentioned, just an example, I live in a very small town of 2,000 people. So there's a lot of relationships that overlap, people that you go to church with or are friends with in real life friends. And then, again, I'm a pediatric PT, and then now I'm seeing their child because their child started school. So, I would say, yes, I do have a couple of Facebook friends who are parents of the patients that I see. I have a couple students that are Facebook friends. I think there's a lot of things to consider. One of the kind of the personal rules that I observe, though, is when it comes to patients or students or anybody I'm in that sort of role with, I don't initiate the friend request.
I agree.
I make sure that friend request comes to me, because I think that when you're in and I think that is even a good rule to observe if you are in a position where you're managing or supervising people, is that you're putting a person, when you're friend requesting somebody who's kind of beneath you, in terms of structure, you're putting them in a really uncomfortable position, So I would say that I don't do that. But otherwise, I think that there are examples. If you're involved in advocacy, for a group, it may make sense for you to be friends with patients. I think it goes without saying that we should never share patient-specific information online, and you'll see lots of healthcare providers who use Facebook and blogs to talk to patients will actually have disclaimers and statements that say things like, if you talk to me on these forums, you are identifying yourself as a patient, so you're in a way sort of waiving that. So I think that there are all kinds of certainly confidentiality and privacy things to consider. And again, it's not necessarily something that has a perfect right or wrong answer. But I think there's a lot to consider. And again, I think it, goes without saying that regardless, you never share patient-specific information online, because HIPAA is HIPAA, no matter whether it's online, in an elevator, over drinks, on the phone, via email. You just never share patient-specific information with somebody who's not authorized to have that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kendra brings up the example of like an advocacy relationship, and I'm been working in the ALS Association clinic, the neurology clinic, for probably 5 years now. And well, part of it too is when people are dying, they don't, you kind of quit caring about some of the stupid stuff. And I do develop some very close relationships with these people. I see them every 3 months in clinic, and I'm involved with fundraising efforts for the ALS Association. And so when patients of mine have initiated it, when they friend requested me, I friend them. And so I have a couple of my patients that I see that I've met through ALS Association that I'm friends with on Facebook. And I got to tell you, it like really enriches the provider relationship. I have so many insights into, just kind of her day-to-day struggles. And it also, I think, really enriches my advocacy efforts, having that insight into, what it means when there's a tornado warning in her community when she's in a power wheelchair that doesn't go downstairs, like that. It kind of gives that level of sensitivity. And a couple of years ago, I put together an event for fundraising, and I was able to network through my Facebook page about this event, both to students and to people I know through that clinic. So, I mean, you just can't write policies for absolutes on like this is what this is where the line of professionalism is, because I would argue that's a very professional relationship. So.
How can institutions like either universities or, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, but I mean, what would improve kind of the gray areas, I suppose, of social media for employers in terms of providing guidelines for their employees? What do you see that might be helpful in terms of support? I know Jocelyn actually either currently or has worked social media for a clinic.
Currently, yeah.
Currently, and so I mean, is that something that you would?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're kind of having that last little piece of the conversation all sort of happen within this context of the friending structure that exists on Facebook. But we know there's also a vast social media landscape beyond Facebook. And so what I really, a main point that I really feel like I wanted to get across both in our paper but also for this discussion is I think we need to adhere. We have a code of ethics. We have HIPAA. We have professionalism, and we need to adhere to all of those things in all environments, including social media. But once we kind of get beyond that, I think we need to quit worrying so much about the don'ts. And I think that's what Carla and I tried to convey in this paper, is getting away from, and I think that a lot of institutions even focus on don't do this, but let's start talking about how healthcare providers can have a well-executed social media presence. Let's start talking about the do's. What can you do? Because I think one of the most exciting opportunities about social media in healthcare is that it gives us this opportunity to communicate with our patients in a place where they already are. And I feel that way as an instructor as well. I mean, you guys know, and I mean, Laura, you know personally, I can get you on Facebook so much faster than I can on email. Students are not on email, and we're getting into a generation that is just not using email as much. And so, if you can find me, if you can tweet at me, if you can access my blog, if I can text you, all of those things can really, I think, facilitate communication and make some really exciting things happen. And, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is there's a great site. It's called Flip the Clinic, fliptheclinic.org, and there's all kinds of, you may have heard of flipping the classroom, where you provide content before class and then in class you actually just discuss and things. Well, the Flip the Clinic is the same idea, and it really, a lot of it focuses on using social media tools, kind of packaging and curating online resources so that you can get all the information to the patient before that encounter, and then when they come in for your clinic visit, they're really ready. And so, I think that there's opportunities to have blogs, to, even if it's not content you create, just to curate content, to find great resources and posts. And I think that those things can help save you time, because if if you are a pediatrician and you have on your blog dosing, for Tylenol for babies based on weight, then you don't have to take 12 calls that day from moms who can't remember how much they're supposed to give their 14-pound baby. They can go to your blog and find that information. So I think it can, save time. It can make patients ready for the clinic, and it can make the in-clinic time a lot more valuable. And again, in our paper, Carla and I talk about that not only is there really an opportunity to do this, but I think that we might both argue that we also have a professional obligation. The 80% of people, internet users, go online for healthcare information. The majority of those diagnose themselves based on what they found. A lot of people make decisions about healthcare providers based on what they find online, whether it be reviews or whether they have a cool blog or a great Twitter feed or whatever. And so I think that we not only have an opportunity, but we may actually have a professional obligation to get into these online spaces and create good online content, or at least amplify positive healthcare messages. Take content that people have already created and reshare that so that we can kind of drown out some of those inaccuracies and that bad information that people inevitably come to us with, that they've already, before they've hit our clinic, they've already Googled, they've already read a million articles. And so what are we contributing? How can we help debunk some of those myths? How can we create and really share good content? And I think that those are the opportunities, and I would like to see us really start to shift as a profession in healthcare to focusing on those opportunities of content creation and what to do.
Mm-hmm. So like today is just like so timely that all of us are seeing again, especially on our feeds, on our social media, all this stuff about Dr. Oz today, right? Like it's all over the place about how he has no credibility anymore. But you can be outraged about the stuff he says, and you can be like, yay, Claire McCaskill for calling him out. But again, when we talk about like amplifying positive messages and refuting the bad, I think you kind of have to take a step back and say, like, where are the physicians to call him out? Why are physicians not saying, hey, Dr. Oz, that's BS. That's not evidence-based practice. Where are the dietitians? Not these hang-a-shingle nutritionists, but why are nutritionists not out there amplifying correct messages and publicly refuting him? And I think that there's a lot of health messages too, including his show, and they get people on there that talk about health, and they just kind of jump on the fads. But again, I think we can kind of sit back and just like get angry about it and annoyed about it. But we're the ones that, if we're the experts on that content, we're the ones that should be out there refuting those messages from those people. So I just keep sitting back like, where are the physicians like that are calling him out? Just kind of seems crazy to me.
It's interesting to me. I was reading an article about that, and it was mentioning that it was a lot more prevalent of especially low-income viewers to get a lot of their, or patients, I suppose, to get their health information through television as opposed to the internet. I mean, are we sort of missing the boat by, obviously we're reaching a really wide population of people by presenting more credible information online, but how can we sort of reach that other audience there then? And how
we had a reference in that paper, Kendra, I don't know if you remember what reference it was, that actually said that you might presume that people that are more affluent have more mobile technology and more internet access and things like that. But actually, social media is a very demographically flat way to share health information. Was that from Pew, Kendra?
I can't remember. I know what you're talking about, and I don't have our paper right in front of us. But yeah, there's pretty well. It's pretty well documented that, and this has really been. This isn't necessarily about social media. This is really about mobile technology. So now that everybody has a computer in their pocket, that there's so many smartphones out there that it has really flattened. There's kind of this anywhere, anytime access to health, or to all online information and also health information, and there's more and more people accessing websites, social media sites on mobile devices. And so when you look at the demographics of different social media sites, they're different. Twitter, for example, tends to be more urban, younger, more minority, and those are all sort of populations that we've always really struggled to capture in getting healthcare, messages out. And so that's a great, place to capture that audience. Pinterest is middle-aged, Caucasian, educated women. That's the largest demographic of people that are on Pinterest. So I think that that's just a really important point to think about. When people ask, well, what platform should I use, or what's your favorite? Our very first guideline in our paper is have clear objectives, and so I think that part of having clear objectives is knowing your audience, and so knowing, where to go, where to put those things. Because, for example, if I'm trying to share information with pediatric physical therapists, guess what? Pediatric PTs happen to be primarily Caucasian, middle-aged, educated women. So Pinterest is a great place for me to share a blog post. I actually get more shares on Pinterest than I do on Twitter most of the time. But again, it just really depends on what your audience is, and that's something to think about. But it is, depending on what site and what you're using, you're right, the audience can be different, and we may be missing the boat if we're not tailoring our message to the right people. So knowing your audience is part of having those objectives as well.
Mm-hmm. In terms of kind of working to your audience, have you two, as professors, noticed changes in the time that you've been implementing social media? I know in my personal experience, it tends to be people that are even younger than I'm 26, and I feel like I sort of was right at the edge of the Twitter kind of boom, and so it was harder for me and sort of the people of my age to really get on board with Twitter at first. I mean, do you see that you've noticed more participation in Twitter, or kind of differing social media platforms with different classes, since you've also done research in that area as well?
Yeah, I've seen a big difference. So I started in the fall of 2011, and when I started my first PT class I had, there were literally only 2 students who had ever used Twitter ever. So it was a very, I had to do a lot of training, a lot of teaching students. I will admit right off the bat there was a lot of kind of pushback and backlash of, I don't know this, this isn't where, I am. And a lot of those students said, I'd much rather us do this on Facebook because I'm much more comfortable with Facebook. Now when I introduce Twitter to a class, now granted, I still typically don't have the majority of students using Twitter, but I'd say I'm usually close to half now, which is a huge jump from having only 2 out of 40, a few years ago, and also is much higher than the general population. The general population, about 18% of internet users are on Twitter. So remember, Twitter, as much as I love Twitter, it is a bit of a niche kind of place, and I think that we have to remember that it's, and the vast majority of people on Twitter have never sent a tweet, not the vast majority, but about 40% I think of Twitter users have never sent a tweet. I actually recently wrote a blog post for the PT Tech SIG that kind of outlines some of that data about Twitter. So, it is a little bit more of a niche for a lot of people, but I will say that now I've found that a lot more students are users, and there's just not the pushback as much anymore. There's still a little, but there's not as much of the pushback anymore, because I think that there is just a little bit more overall comfort. I think students now are a little bit more adventurous. I think that students are more comfortable with kind of using social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus or whatever, in kind of personal and professional lives. I think you guys have gotten more used to kind of those worlds kind of overlapping. So I've noticed I think I've noticed a pretty significant change. And we also have been looking at a little bit of trend data where we are seeing students kind of gradually getting more comfortable using social media for not just personal purposes, but educational and professional purposes. So we're kind of seeing that what students report to us is kind of mirroring what anecdotally I feel like I see. My first group of Twitter users, I had to spend over an hour with, doing a tutorial, and here's how we use it, and here's what a hashtag is. The most recent group of students I did Twitter with, I think it took 15 minutes. They were kind of like, yeah, we got this, because even if they weren't Twitter users, they kind of understood what a hashtag was, and they kind of just got what it was. So definitely seeing that change.
But the other thing, the other kind of side of that, I guess we can say thanks, Laura, for leading to our other manuscript that we just sent in, right, Kendra?
Yeah.
We also kind of found in some data that we looked at across several programs that although you can make some assumptions that students, but I mean people in our society, but also younger students, students that have been using these technologies most of their life, are more comfortable with using it for personal reasons, but it's kind of like tip of the iceberg use, that it's not deep use. So they might be on Facebook and they're on Twitter, but when you ask them like whether they're using RSS feeds, I talk to our DPT students, I'm like, in the research class, I'm like, okay, here's an RSS feed. Do you guys know what an RSS feed is? And they're like, no, don't know what an RSS feed is. And I say to them, you've probably already discovered Physiopedia, right, when you've had to research some topic? No, they haven't discovered Physiopedia on their own. You know this bibliography manager? It makes your life so much easier? No, they don't know about it. And maybe even kind of like my favorite thing is like using Flipboard to kind of curate very specific kind of news feeds, and then I have a page on Flipboard just for professional news feeds. And I share that with students in the research class. Like, here's a way that you can like just blast all these articles that you want to see, to this one place, kind of a customized newspaper. And students are like, oh, that's cool. But they're not necessarily finding these things, seeking them out, particularly for those professional reasons. They might be seeking those things out. They might be finding Tinder or something for personal reasons, but they're not finding advanced uses of social media for professional purposes. That's just kind of one of the themes that I think somewhat goes against this idea that digital natives will just naturally do those things. That there's always going to be just kind of that bell-shaped curve of people that are just more adventurous with technology and are going to be seeking those things and experimenting with them. But I don't think we can make assumptions that students are going to, in the next 5 years, because they grew up with Twitter since they were 10 years old, are going to hit their classroom with getting tweets from PTJ or something like that. I don't think that that's an assumption that we're finding we can make.
And I think that really supports one of kind of my biggest sort of thoughts or things that I really like to convey, is that I think that's why this is important to teach to students, to really include as part of the professionalism curriculum, because we talk about other forms of communication. We've talked for years about email communication and verbal and nonverbal communication. And so to me, this is just a natural extension of that. And I think that sometimes there's a little bit of a reaction of like, oh, the kids these days, they know how to use these tools. They grew up using them, but they didn't grow up using them for professional purposes. Mm-hmm. Just like you did, you may have grown up, you may have gone to high school or college and learned how to write an essay, but you didn't learn how to document physical therapy, in a professional way. I mean, you had to learn kind of the lingo and the abbreviations and the, kind of how that looks, and there's a style that looks like, of kind of written communication between healthcare providers, and I think that that's true a little bit in social media too. So, and I think, yeah, Carla's exactly right, is that we found, and this has been actually found across literature, is that there may really not be there's maybe no such thing as digital natives. The whole idea of digital natives may be a little bit of a myth, that, just because you grew up using with a tablet, you may still really just be using it to read email and surf the web. And you're not really getting into that really complex use. So I think that that's why this is such an important topic, and so important to be thinking about incorporating this into the curriculum, so that we can, because I think students, we do need to have these conversations with students and new professionals.
In the next 5 to 10 years, how do you expect to see social media change based on kind of the changes that we've seen in the last few years, both in the clinic or classroom or?
Well, I think that one of the things that Kendra and I were kind of initially, one of our early drafts of that perspective in PTJ that hit the cutting room floor was talking a little bit about anticipatory technology, and whether there's such thing as Web 3.0 or not, but that's what Web 3.0 would be, is anticipatory technology. So not just having interactive social media, but social media, well, like Facebook is kind of starting to go there. So if you've enabled the Friends feature on your Facebooks, on your mobile device, on your phone, well, there's a Friends feature. So if you go to it, that's 2.0. You can go and just check, like, oh, my friend that I haven't seen it forever is back home too, and so we can get together. But if it were anticipatory technology, it would alert you, like, hey, did you realize that you're within 5 minutes of having coffee with Julie or something,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we think about the use of trackers, wearable technologies, I think that combination of wearable technologies with anticipatory technology is those two things meeting is going to have some really powerful. It's going to offer powerful tools for us in health monitoring and I don't want to say surveillance of our patients, but kind of just supports, lifestyle supports and educational supports or exercise supports and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly kind of my thinking too. I mean, I think we're all hearing a lot about wearable tech, and now we all have Fitbits and Nike Fuel Bands and Jawbone, and there's Google Glass. People are starting to wear Google Glass, and Carla and I actually had the opportunity to kind of play around with Google Glass a little while ago, which was kind of fun. But I think that wearable tech is the future. But I think too, just recently with the iOS 8 update, for example, Apple has come out with the Health Kit or the Health app, and part of that is a Health Kit, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions about that, but they're kind of partnering with Nike and the Fuel Band, and I think that their idea eventually is to have this, where you're kind of all of your health information is kind of, they're planning on working with different, I think they're working with Mayo Clinic, I heard, a lot of different app developers and fitness tracking devices, so that you have all this health information within this app, whether it's your vitals, your activity, your diet, your hydration. And then you can kind of select what you're going to share with your physician or healthcare provider. So I think we're going to start seeing this ability to, have a patient wearing, a Fitbit or whatever it is at that time and sending that information to you so that you don't have to say, did you do your exercises? Because they've already sent that to you. That's already been sent to you, and so I think it's. Of course, what I hope. I mean, I love technology. I think technology is fun and it's exciting. And what I hope is that in 5 to 10 years, that there's things that we can't even imagine. And that's what I expect. And I think going back to social media, that's kind of one of our principles that we put forward was we said to take an agnostic approach to social media, and I think it was really in that spirit, because I think 5 to 10 years ago, if you would have explained to people that they would be wearing, a device, then had an app on a smartphone that was telling them how many steps they took in a day and how much, how many flights of stairs they went up, and people would have been confused, and a lot of people would have said, I would never let that happen, But I think that, that we have to, I think it's important to take an agnostic approach because things are going to change so much, and in 5 to 10 years, everything we're talking about now, I hope, is completely obsolete, and there's completely new tools and a new kind of landscape that we're looking at in terms of health, how these technologies interface with health.
I think it changes the way we look at, the joke is that Facebook has ruined the word friend forever. But, I think, when you take a big, like 30,000 foot view, there's been talk about this with millennials too, and, that you guys aren't so bad. But you just approach work and life differently than baby boomers or Gen Xers. And that you don't compartmentalize and you don't assume that life can be compartmentalized. Work doesn't stop because your file cabinet and your phone is in an office. So although baby boomers might be like, oh, they just want to get out of here as soon as they're done with work, it's like millennials kind of just don't see that they ever leave the office necessarily because their mobile technology is always with them. Your phone continues to email you, alert you with emails and things like that. So I think some of these mobile technologies and Web 2.0 just changes society. So I think some of these questions like, should I friend a patient and should I have dual citizenship? I kind of think there's such baby boomer conceptions of how society is. And I think it's going to, there's things of whether we're going to be a more stratified society, Web 2.0 is very demographically democratic information, and I mean that with a small d. It's very everybody can share that information, and no, you know, it's not hierarchical sharing of information. So I think that that's an interesting way that is just going to reconceptualize what the relationships are between providers and between providers and the patients, and what the clock is of providers' hours.
Mm-hmm. I did have one last question, just that I wanted to. We've had a couple of Twitter questions, and unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them tonight. But we were wondering what you mentioned in the article that empirical research on social media is lacking as of right now, and it's constantly evolving. How do we resolve this, or where do we start, I guess, is the real question with social media research.
Well, I think that, yeah, so I think, first of all, I kind of just want to throw out there that I will say that I think that the nature of the peer review research process makes it really difficult when it comes to technology. And I've even experienced that too, that, you know, the review process, I mean, sometimes, you know, for example, our PTJ perspective was over a year from submission to online print. It'll be probably about a year and a half or more from submission to true print. That's a long time in the world of social media and technology. So I think that it's, I guess I just kind of want to start by saying, given the kind of the current culture of peer review and just the time that takes, not by any fault of the journals, but just because that is the process, I think it's a kind of an uphill battle, because, you know, then you have, you know, papers posted about platforms that don't exist anymore, or that have been completely updated and look really different. But I think that, you know, we're hoping, you know, we have our perspective, and there's also another perspective that was recently published online, and that I believe is going to run in the same print journal with ours. They're sort of complementary about social media. So as far as we know, these are the first two papers that anybody's written in PT about social networking, you know, true Web 2.0 kind of technologies and professionalism. I've done some work in Twitter, and I have a paper that's coming out, that's going to be coming out in the Journal of Allied Health probably this winter, about using Twitter in professional education. And Carla and I, along with Dr. Eric Robertson, have worked on a paper about, and it's submitted, it's under review right now, about DPT student technology use. So I think, you know, so I guess to me that you know, some of the work that I'm doing, and along with some of my colleagues, is, you know, just kind of describing kind of who's using it, what are we doing, kind of figuring out consensus. But, you know, the paper we wrote, the guidelines, there's no research to back any of those up. It's just based on kind of consensus in the literature. And a lot of it we pulled from the medical literature, because frankly, physicians are way ahead of us in this game. I mean, physicians have been writing and publishing about using social media for 5 years or more now. And so we're just starting to get off the ground. But I think, you know, I think that we need to be, you know, figure out who's using what, you know, describe how students and clinicians are using social media. And then I think we're, you know, it's going to take some research to figure out kind of how that affects, you know, does it have any impact on outcomes? You know, and a study that I think was really interesting, and then I'll stop because I know we're running on time, but it was, I believe published in 2012 or 2013, very recent, but it was about Facebook and hospitals. And what they looked at a group of hospitals in New York, and they looked at how many Facebook likes that hospital's page had. And then they also looked at quality, and they measured quality using 30-day mortality rates. And what they found was that the more likes a hospital Facebook page had, the lower the 30-day mortality rate. So who knows what that means? You know, and it's just one study in a group of hospitals in New York. But there may be some, I think that there's just some really interesting questions out there about how patients are using it in communities, you know, groups, how people, you know, like diabetes support groups and cancer survivorship groups, how healthcare providers and organizations can, you know, how it connects to actual real outcomes in terms of quality in education. I think we could look at, you know, how does it relate to outcomes, real outcomes in terms of, you know, professional behaviors with students. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, because really it's an open field. I mean, nobody's really started doing any of this work yet. I don't know, Carla, do you have any other?
Well, I think that's the big thing about any research is like, well, like what are the, like getting beyond like, well, whether PTs are using it and whether patients are on there, but then like how does it impact the outcomes? And we keep hearing that. We hear this over and over again about we're going to start getting paid by our outcomes and things like that. And in looking at that, it appears from the literature that I've seen that the ones that are leading that is like public health is looking at use of Twitter for like public health messaging, particular to adolescents. So like STD kind of messaging or things like that, high risk teen behaviors. So I think we're going to start to see some of that literature and some of those studies coming out from the public health fields. But as PT kind of continues into that public health arena and fills that kind of wellness space of community wellness, I think that that's a huge opportunity for looking at some outcomes research.
And I think, too, another thing that just came to my mind was this whole idea of peer-to-peer healthcare, which Pew has been looking at a lot at putting out a lot of data about that. But I think, too, that, again, with social networking and even future technologies, I think you're going to see a lot more of, again, kind of patients, especially, with rare conditions and chronic conditions coming online and kind of saying, hey, is there anybody else out there like me? And finding each other, which is an enormous opportunity for people. I think of all the kids that I've worked with that have these rare genetic diagnoses, and what a wonderful opportunity to be able to find people around the world who are experiencing that. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of this idea of kind of peer-to-peer healthcare, flipping the clinic, the idea of the e-patient, figuring out how to use, how can we let a patient email us and our primary care provider, and can we make that billable? How are we going to navigate some of these waters? Because I would love to be able to just send my pediatrician a picture of a rash on my kids and figure out if I need to bring them in or not, and save us all time if we don't. And when are we going to get to that point where we really can all do that consistently?
Most people now, like if you go to the doctor, you can like see your health record, so you can get online and access your health record. But I have to wonder if the next thing is like a participatory health record, where you don't just view your health record, but you can contribute to your health record.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So many unanswered questions. Exciting new topics to talk about. Definitely in a later discussion. It looks like we'll have
lots of new ideas.
Another one. So. Thank you so much to both of you for coming and talking and sharing your knowledge with everybody. This link will be posted on YouTube, so we'll have access onto eternity and make that public for everyone to see. But thank you again to both of you. Really appreciate it. And I guess we will post links to some of the blogs that you had mentioned during today's interview on Twitter as well, with the DPT student hashtag, so that our viewers can reference some of those as well. So
thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a great night, everyone.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Night.
Good night.